Sometimes the most profound discoveries are hidden in plain sight. For Elara, a young historian with a passion for forgotten lore, that discovery was a cryptic journal tucked away in the deepest university archives. Its pages spoke of a legendary alchemist named Arian and his final, reality-altering formula. This was not just an academic curiosity. It was a dangerous secret, one that promised to unravel the very fabric of the world. By the end of this journey, you will uncover the true cost of wielding power that can transform reality itself. What ancient force did Arian discover, and why was it meant to stay lost? I am always curious to know if you would like to share where you are joining us from and what the local time is there. What would you risk to learn a truth that could change everything? The journal's cryptic symbols began to shift under Elara's focused gaze. Late one night, under the single lamp in her study, the patterns resolved into a verse about a forgotten star and a silent guardian of knowledge. It was a riddle, a set of directions pointing to the oldest library on campus. Following the clues, she found a loose stone behind a towering bookcase, revealing a small alcove untouched for centuries. Inside rested a compass, but it was unlike any she had ever seen. Forged from a cool, unknown metal, it lay perfectly still in her palm, and then it began to hum with a faint, vibrational energy that traveled up her arm. This was no mere tool for navigation. It was a key, and its activation was a silent alarm. Dr. Alistair Vance, a senior scholar she had once admired, took a sudden, sharp interest in her research. He began appearing in the same reading rooms, asking pointed questions about obscure alchemical texts. The compass was real, and so was the danger. Elara now faced a critical choice. Could she trust anyone with this secret, or was she destined to walk this path alone? The humming compass needle had settled, no longer pointing north, but holding steady toward a location marked on no modern map, a distant and forgotten city. The humming in the compass became a steady pulse as Elara stepped into the library's main hall, a rhythm that seemed to sync with her own quickening heartbeat. Dr. Vance was waiting for her, his silhouette framed by the towering stained glass windows. His usual scholarly warmth was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating stillness. He did not mince words. He knew about the journal, he knew about the compass, and he presented her with a stark ultimatum: share everything, or he would use his considerable influence to have her research discredited and her position at the university revoked. He spoke of academic theft and unstable mental states, painting a picture that would destroy her reputation completely. The safety of the institution, he argued, was the only path for a discovery of this magnitude. But Elara saw the hunger in his eyes, a greed that had nothing to do with preservation. In that moment, the choice was terrifyingly clear. She could not entrust Arian's legacy to him. With a quiet, firm refusal, she turned her back on everything she had worked for. That single act severed her from the academic world forever, branding her a renegade in the eyes of her former colleagues. She fled the campus that night, with nothing but the journal and the compass, its needle now her only guide. The structured world of scholarship was behind her, and ahead lay the vast, unpredictable landscape where the alchemist's secret was not just a historical curiosity, but a treasure hunted by forces she was only beginning to understand. The compass led her to a sea of sand and stone, Elara's journey ended at the edge of a forgotten city, its name erased by time and wind. The sun beat down on crumbling arches and skeletal buildings, a landscape of bleached bone and silence. This was the first location from Arian's journal, a proving ground. The compass needle, which had guided her across continents, now fell utterly still. The final direction was not given. It had to be earned. She moved through the ruins like a ghost, her every footstep threatening to dislodge unstable stones. The air was thick with the scent of dust and decay, and the only sounds were the scuttling of unseen creatures and the occasional groan of shifting rock. She was not alone. Figures moved in the periphery, shadowy scavengers picking at the corpse of the city, and she knew her presence would not go unnoticed for long. Her mind raced, piecing together the alchemist's clues from the journal. A verse spoke of a tower that watched the sunset through a needle's eye. She found the remains of a spire, its western wall pierced by a narrow slit, and as the sun dipped low, a dagger of light shot across the ruins, striking the facade of a half-buried structure. This was the entrance. The way inside was a treacherous climb down into darkness, a maze of collapsed corridors where one wrong step could mean being buried alive. She finally pushed through a wall of rubble into a circular chamber. The air changed, becoming cool and still. This was no tomb, it was a laboratory. Ancient glass vials, their contents long crystallized, sat beside intricate apparatuses of tarnished brass. On a central stone table, a single, perfectly preserved slate rested. It was not a formula, but a map. Etched onto its surface were 3 distinct markers in far-flung corners of the world, and beside them, the names of the components needed. The breath of a star, the heart of the mountain, the tears of the moon. Arian's final work was not a single secret, but a grand synthesis. The formula was a lock, and these were the keys. To fail in finding even one would render all others useless. The alchemist had not hidden his knowledge. He had designed a quest, a challenge that would test the resolve and intellect of any who sought his power. The stakes were no longer academic. They were absolute. The chamber held its breath as Elara's fingers traced the symbols on the central slate. A low hum resonated through the stone beneath her feet, and from the air itself, a figure coalesced. It was not a ghost of flesh, but a being woven from shimmering light and fractured memory, its form shifting like smoke. This was the Guardian. Its voice echoed not in the air, but directly in her mind, a cascade of ancient languages resolving into a single, clear question. It spoke of the prima materia, the formless base of all matter, and asked not for its name, but for the principle that compelled its transformation. This was not a test of rote memorization. It was a challenge to understand the soul of alchemy, to see the desire for change as a fundamental force of the universe itself. Elara's academic mind raced, discarding textbook definitions. She thought of Arian's journal, of his obsession with intent, and the observer's role in shaping reality. Her answer was not a single word, but a concept. Potential, the unmanifested possibility waiting for consciousness to give it form. A silence followed, thick and heavy. Then, the Guardian posed a second riddle, a paradox of balance. It described a process where the seeker must both hold and release, command and submit. She recalled the compass, how it had guided her, but demanded her own will to follow. The answer was not control, but partnership, a dialogue with the forces one sought to wield. With her final reply, the spectral guardian dissolved into a shower of light that swirled around her, warm and approving. The sensation was not one of victory, but of acceptance. A single, glowing rune seared itself into the surface of the slate, the first true fragment of Arian's formula. But as the light faded, a sharp, cold pain shot through her palm. She looked down. The compass, which she still held, was gone. In its place was a mark, an intricate symbol branded into her skin, pulsing with a faint, familiar rhythm. She understood instantly. The quest was no longer an object she carried. It was a part of her. Her life force and the compass were now one, the artifact's purpose fused with her own heartbeat. To abandon the search was to sever a part of her own spirit. She was no longer a scholar or a renegade. She was the keeper, and the path ahead was irrevocably tied to the very air in her lungs. The mark on her palm pulsed like a second heart as Elara entered the chaos of the desert market. The air was thick with the scent of spices, roasting meat, and the dry, dusty wind that swept through the narrow streets. This was the place the slate had hinted at, a crossroads for those who traded in things not found on any ordinary map. She moved through the crowd, her senses heightened, the brand's rhythm guiding her past stalls of vibrant textiles and gleaming metalwork, until she found herself before a merchant who sold only curiosities. His wares were arranged on a simple rug, a collection of strangely shaped stones, desiccated roots, and vials of iridescent sand. His eyes, sharp and knowing, settled on her before she even spoke. He knew what she sought. The barter was not for currency. He demanded a story, a piece of forgotten knowledge from Arian's journal. In exchange, he produced a small, crystalline vial filled with a liquid that seemed to hold a captured storm, swirling with silver and gray. The tears of the sky, he called it, water that had never touched the earth, collected from the heart of a high-altitude tempest. As his fingers closed around the story she offered, a subtle shift occurred in the crowd. A group of figures, dressed in unadorned gray robes, moved with a synchronized purpose, their gazes locking onto her. The merchant's hand tightened on her arm for a fleeting second. The keepers of the veil, he whispered, his voice urgent. They believe such power should remain lost. They will not ask for the vial. They will simply take it and silence you to protect their secret. The transaction was complete. Elara clutched the vial, its cool surface, a stark contrast to the sudden heat of fear. She melted back into the throng of people, the keepers now moving with unnerving speed to cut off her escape. The chase was a blur of shoving through packed alleys, ducking under low-hanging fabrics, and leaping over baskets of goods. She could hear their soft, determined footfalls close behind, a persistent threat amid the market's din. The merchant's warning echoed in her mind. Their ruthlessness was not born of malice, but of a fanatical belief. Was their goal to protect the world from a power it was not ready to wield? Or were they just another kind of jailer, like Vance, wanting to control what they feared? She slipped into a dimly lit tannery, the pungent smell of hides masking her scent, and watched the gray-clad figures pass by. For now, she was safe. But the decision was made. She could not trust their intention. The formula was a danger, yes, but it was also a truth, and she would not let anyone bury it again. The tannery's stench clung to her clothes and lungs, a desperate kind of camouflage. Elara pressed herself against a damp wall, listening as the soft, sandaled footfalls of the keepers paused just outside the entrance. They were methodical, patient. They would not leave until every shadow was checked. Her hand closed around the vial in her pocket, the tears of the sky feeling impossibly heavy. Trapped with nowhere to run, she braced for the inevitable. Then, a hand clamped over her mouth from behind, pulling her backward into a deeper darkness. She struggled, but a low, calm voice hissed in her ear. "Be still. If you want to live, come with me now." The grip was firm, but not cruel, and the choice was between a known threat and an unknown one. She went limp, allowing herself to be guided through a labyrinth of hanging animal hides and out a hidden rear exit into a narrow, deserted alley. The moment they were clear, her rescuer released her. He was a man perhaps a decade older than her, his skin weathered by sun and wind, his eyes the color of the desert sky just before dusk. He introduced himself as Kale, a traveler of the deep sands. He had been watching the market, he explained, and had seen the keepers close in on a stranger. He knew what that meant. As he spoke, two of the gray-robed figures emerged from the tannery, their hooded heads turning in unison toward the alley. There was no time for explanations. Kale moved with an instinctual knowledge of the terrain, leading her over crumbling walls and through passages so narrow they had to turn sideways. When the keepers cornered them in a dead-end courtyard, their escape seemingly cut off, Elara's academic mind provided the answer. She remembered a passage from Arian's journal about resonance and unstable structures. Shouting to Kale, she pointed to a specific archway, its keystone cracked and ancient. He understood immediately, using his weight and a well-placed kick against the supporting wall. The stone groaned, and a cascade of dust and rubble fell, not enough to bury their pursuers, but just enough to create a choking cloud of confusion, allowing their escape into the open desert beyond the city's edge. Catching their breath under the vast, star-dusted sky, the truth came out. Kale was not just a wanderer. His own family lore was intertwined with Arian's legend. His great-grandfather had been a guide for the alchemist himself, a trusted companion who helped hide the very components Elara now sought. For generations, his family had waited, watching for a sign that someone worthy had picked up the trail once more. The mark on her palm was that sign. This fragile partnership was born of mutual need. Elara possessed the journal and the intellect to decipher it. Kale had the survival skills, the knowledge of the land, and a personal stake in seeing the quest completed. Safety, for the first time since Shed left the university, felt like a tangible possibility, but it came with a price. Her mission was no longer a solitary burden. Every decision, every risk was now shared. The weight of the secret was halved, but the emotional stakes had just doubled. Could she trust this stranger with a legacy that was now a part of her very being? And what would happen when their goals, so perfectly aligned for now, might one day diverge? The desert gave way to a miracle of water and stone. Kale led her to a place that should not have existed, a hidden oasis, cradled within a ring of jagged black rock. By day it was a sanctuary, but as night fell, its true nature was revealed. The still, dark water of the central pool became a perfect mirror, reflecting the starry expanse above with such clarity that the boundary between sky and earth dissolved. This was the Oasis of Echoes, the second location from the slate. The air hummed with a subtle energy, a resonance that seemed to vibrate in their very bones. Kale warned her that the guardian here did not attack the body, but the mind. It would use their own regrets as weapons. As Elara stepped toward the starlit pool, the world around her shimmered and warped. The desert vanished, replaced by the familiar, hallowed halls of her university. She stood in the grand lecture hall, but it was empty save for one person. Dr. Vance stood at the podium, not as the threatening figure from the library, but as her respected mentor. He gestured to a vacant seat in the front row, his expression one of profound disappointment. An illusion took solid form beside him, a phantom Elara who had accepted his ultimatum. This other version of her wore the robes of a tenured professor, her research celebrated, her career secure and respected. The phantom held up a published paper, its title a dry, academic analysis of Arian's journal as mere historical fiction. This was the life she had sacrificed. The vision was a perfect echo of her deepest regret, the path not taken. Vance's voice was calm, reasonable. You threw away a brilliant future for a fairy tale. You are chasing a phantom, while your real legacy crumbles to dust. Look at what you could have been. The weight of his words pressed down on her, a suffocating blanket of doubt. For a moment, she felt the crushing loneliness of her exile, the sting of being an outcast. But then she looked at the phantom Elara, at the sterile success it represented. That version of her had traded the raw, terrifying truth for comfortable lies. She thought of the humming compass, now a part of her hand, of the living energy in the tears of the sky. That was real. This vision was a beautiful, polished tomb. Her own voice, when it came, was quiet but unwavering. That life was a cage. I did not lose my future. I chose a different one. With that declaration, the spectral Vance and his perfect pupil shattered like glass, the shards dissolving into motes of starlight. The oppressive lecture hall faded, and she was back at the Oasis, kneeling at the water's edge, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The surface of the pool rippled, and a second rune, glowing with a soft silver light, rose from the depths and etched itself into the air before settling onto the mental image of her slate. She had the second fragment. The victory felt hollow, scraped raw. The confrontation had not been with a monster, but with her own soul, and the emotional toll was immense. A new, insidious doubt now whispered in the quiet corners of her mind. If the Oasis could so perfectly exploit one regret, what other weaknesses lay within her, waiting to be used against her? Her resolve was stronger, but her defenses felt thinner than ever. The Oasis air still hummed with the residue of her internal battle, when a familiar voice cut through the silence. Elara, we really must stop meeting like this. Dr. Vance stepped from behind a date palm, his tailored suit starkly out of place in the wild sanctuary. He was not alone. Two of the keepers of the veil flanked him, their gray robes blending into the twilight, their faces impassive. Vance spread his hands in a placating gesture, his expression one of weary reason. He confessed he had been the one to alert the keepers to her discovery, believing their intervention was a necessary safeguard. His offer was not a threat, but a proposal. Join them, he urged. Place the formula and its components under the stewardship of a controlled, scholarly institution. This power is not for a lone individual to wield, Elara. It is a force for humanity, to be studied and applied with caution and oversight. Think of the chaos one misstep could cause. With us, you would be protected, and your work would have meaning. His words were smooth, logical, and terrifying. He painted a picture of a gilded cage where she would be a respected contributor, her genius channeled and controlled. All she had to do was surrender the journal, the components, and her freedom. Kale stood silent a few paces away, his body tense, his distrust of Vance and the Keepers a palpable force. Elara looked from Vace's reasonable face to Kale's wary one. One path offered security and structure, a return to a world that made sense. The other was a treacherous road with a man she barely knew, guided only by a mark on her hand and a belief in a dead alchemist's vision. Her choice was instant, a truth that sprang from the brand pulsing in her palm. Arian did not hide his work for it to be locked in another vault, she said, her voice quiet but firm. He hid it so that only someone willing to risk everything could find it. I will not trade one prison for another. Vance's mask of civility shattered. The weary scholar vanished, replaced by a man whose ambition had curdled into something cold and sharp. You are a fool, he hissed, a reckless child playing with fire that will burn this world to ashes. I tried to save you from yourself. Since you refuse, I will save the world from you. He gave a curt nod to the Keepers, and the three of them melted back into the shadows of the rocks. The message was clear. He was no longer her disappointed mentor. He was her enemy, and he would use every resource at his disposal to ensure she failed. The Oasis no longer felt like a sanctuary, but the site of a new and more dangerous front in her war. Vance knew the academic trails she might walk and the historical sources she would need. He could anticipate her moves, block her paths, and turn the entire world of knowledge against her. Her independence was now her greatest strength and her most profound vulnerability. The air in the Oasis tasted of betrayal and dust, a bitter residue of Vance's threat. Their only lead now was a fragmented verse from the journal, pointing to a library that had drowned centuries ago. Kale led them on a grueling trek to a coastal region where the sea had reclaimed an entire city. The ruins lay just beneath the waves, a ghostly skyline of algae covered spires visible from the cliffs above. According to the lore, the archive was an alchemical construct, designed to protect its secrets by submerging them. They would have to dive for the truth. At the water's edge, they found a hidden entrance, a stone archway leading down into the dark. The air within was stale and humid, the corridor sloping sharply into the deep. The final barrier was a massive, circular door made of a strange, non-corroding metal, etched with a complex pattern of channels and basins. As they approached, a mechanism clicked, and seawater began to pour into the channels from hidden vents. The archive was flooding itself, a timed test. They had to solve the hydraulic puzzle to open the door before the chamber filled completely. The puzzles were a brutal dance of logic and rising water. The first required them to redirect flows by manipulating a series of ancient levers, each movement causing the water to surge or recede in different sections of the intricate floor design. Kale, with his practical understanding of pressure and flow, took the lead, shouting instructions as the cold salt water swirled around their waists. Elara's role was to interpret the alchemical symbols carved beside each lever, her mind racing to match theory to the physical reality of the rushing water. The second puzzle was even more demanding, a series of interlocking basins that needed to be filled to specific levels in a precise sequence. One miscalculation and a hidden siphon would drain the entire system, forcing them to start over as the water level crept higher, now lapping at their chests. Their communication became shorthand, a series of sharp, trusting exchanges born of necessity. There was no time for doubt. Elara had to trust Kale's instincts with the mechanisms as completely as he trusted her translations of the archaic symbols. Their survival hinged on this fragile, hard-won synergy. With a final, grinding shudder, the great door slid open just as the water reached their chins. They pushed through into a dry, circular chamber beyond, the door sealing shut behind them. The air was cool and still, filled with a soft, internal light. This was the heart of the Sunken archive. Knowledge was not stored on parchment here, but was grown. Crystalline structures, like intricate geodes, pulsed with a gentle luminescence, each one containing entire libraries of information encoded in its lattice. In the center of the room, a single, flawless crystal spire rose from the floor. As Elara placed her branded palm against it, the crystal responded to her touch, projecting a complex, three-dimensional map into the air. It depicted a raging volcanic island, and at its heart, a location labeled only as the Forge of Concepts. This was where the final component, the heart of the mountain, was waiting. But as the map faded, a ragged cough echoed through the chamber. Kale slumped against the wall, his face pale and beaded with sweat. The intense physical exertion and the chill of the flood had taken a severe toll. He tried to wave it off, but his weakness was undeniable. The quest's physical demands were escalating, and his strength, once so reliable, now had a limit. Their success had given them the next step, but it had also exposed a critical vulnerability. Could Kale endure what was to come, or was the path to the forge a challenge that would break him? The volcanic island's heat was a physical weight, pressing down with each labored breath as they ascended the treacherous slope. Kale's condition had worsened, his steps faltering, forcing them to move at a painstaking pace. The entrance to the Forge of Concepts was not a cave, but a fissure in the mountainside that glowed with a deep, internal fire. Stepping inside was like entering the world's beating heart. The air shimmered with heat haze, and the very stone seemed to pulse with a slow, rhythmic energy. In the center of the vast cavern stood a massive anvil of black obsidian, and beside it, a forge whose flames were not orange and red, but a swirling vortex of pure silver light. This was not a place for shaping metal, but for shaping reality itself. Resting on the anvil was the reason for their journey, the final component. It was not a gem or a stone, but a shard of pure, solidified magma, dark and lifeless. This was the heart of the mountain, but it was dormant, its power locked away. To claim it, Elara would have to awaken it. The trial was simple and terrifying. She had to reforge a broken tool, a small, cracked lens that lay beside the anvil, using only the silver flame and the force of her own intent. As she focused her will, reaching out with her mind toward the forge, the silver flame roared to life. It did not burn her skin, but her consciousness. It felt as if her very thoughts were being pulled into a star. Visions and memories flashed before her, not as regrets, but as raw material. The frustration of deciphering Arian's journal, the fear of fleeing Vance, the trust she had placed in Kale, the crushing doubt from the Oasis, all of it was fed into the flame. The process demanded absolute focus. She had to hold the image of the completed lens in her mind, perfect and whole, while the forge consumed her mental energy like kindling. A searing headache bloomed behind her eyes, and a profound weariness settled into her bones. It was a battle of attrition, her will against the forge's boundless appetite. She felt herself fraying at the edges, her concentration threatening to shatter. Just as her mental strength was about to break, a final, clear image solidified in her mind. It was not of the lens, but of the first rune she had earned, a symbol of potential. She understood. She was not commanding the flame. She was partnering with it, offering her intent as the catalyst for its transformative power. With that shift in perspective, the resistance vanished. The silver flame condensed, pouring into the cracked lens. There was no loud clang of a hammer, only a soft, resonant chime that filled the cavern. Where the broken tool had been, a new artifact now lay. It was a monocle of flawless crystal, set in a frame of the same cool metal as her lost compass. As she lifted it, the dormant heart of the mountain on the anvil ignited with a soft, warm, crimson light, its power now accessible. She had passed the trial. But the cost was immense. She collapsed to her knees, physically drained, her mind feeling hollowed out and fragile. The newly forged monocle felt heavy in her hand, a tangible proof of her growing mastery. She had not just repaired a tool, she had performed a fundamental act of alchemy, turning the abstract substance of her experiences into a concrete object of power. The process had given her a profound, instinctual understanding of Arian's methods. True transformation was not an act of force, but a conscious collaboration with the hidden forces of the world. Yet holding the empowered artifact, feeling the immense potential now resting in her palm, she was more aware than ever of the formula's terrifying scope. If reforging a simple lens demanded so much of her spirit, what would wielding the completed formula do? The crimson glow of the heart of the mountain pulsed in time with the ache behind Elara's eyes. She turned from the obsidian anvil, the newly forged monocle cool in her hand, to find Kale staring not at their prize, but at her. His face was ashen, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and something deeper, something like dread. "You did not just reforge a lens in there," he said, his voice low and strained. "You changed. The air in that chamber, it did not just test you, it fed on you. And you let it." He gestured weakly toward the silver flame of the forge, still swirling in its pit. "This power is not a tool, Elara. It is a poison that convinces you it is a cure. Look at the cost. Look at what it demands from you, piece by piece. We should leave it here, bury the components and walk away before it consumes you entirely." His plea was not born of fear for himself, but for her, and the conviction in his voice was a solid, immovable wall. Elara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She looked from his desperate face to the empowered artifact in her palm, feeling its potential humming against her skin. To abandon the quest now was to render every sacrifice meaningless. It was to leave Arian's legacy, a power capable of reshaping reality itself, hidden but not lost, waiting for someone like Vance to find it. "This knowledge cannot be buried," she countered, her own voice trembling with a mix of fatigue and fierce resolve. It exists. That is the danger. If we walk away, we are not protecting the world. We are leaving a loaded weapon in the sand for a child to find. My responsibility is not to hide from it, but to secure it, to understand it, so it can never be misused. Their argument echoed through the cavern, a clash of two irreconcilable truths. Kale saw a friend being hollowed out by an addiction to forbidden power. Elara saw a guardian preventing a catastrophe. There was no middle ground, no compromise between preservation and pursuit. The trust that had carried them through sunken archives and desert chases fractured in that moment, unable to bear the weight of this fundamental divergence. With a final, sorrowful look, Kale shook his head. I cannot follow you down this path. I will not watch it destroy you. He turned and began the slow, painful walk back toward the fissure, leaving her alone in the forge's pulsating light. The silence he left behind was more deafening than any volcanic rumble. Her alliance was broken. Her one true companion was gone. Yet as she stood there utterly alone, a strange clarity settled over her. The solitude was terrifying, but it was also pure. Every decision, every consequence was now hers alone. Her determination did not waver, it hardened, becoming a cold, sharp certainty. She tucked the monocle into her pack and clutched the warm, glowing heart of the mountain. The next location was clear in her mind, a place of final reckoning whispered in the last pages of the journal. She would face it alone, because some burdens are not meant to be shared. The path led her from volcanic fire to a city of impossible light. The city of reflections rose from the plains like a forest of silver and glass, its towers and streets composed entirely of mirrors. From a distance, it was a dazzling spectacle, but as Elara stepped inside, the true nature of the place unfolded. It was a prison of perception. The inhabitants moved like ghosts, their gazes fixed not on each other, but on their own endless reflections. They had polished their mirrored surfaces for so long that they had forgotten the faces behind the glass, their true identities lost to the flattering or frightening illusions they constantly curated. They whispered to their reflections, sought validation from the silvered walls, and recoiled from any surface that showed a truth they did not wish to see. The air itself felt brittle, charged with the silent panic of 1,000 fragmented souls. This was the location of the third formula fragment, a trial not of strength or intellect, but of sanity. To find the hidden piece of Arian's puzzle, she would have to navigate a labyrinth where every turn showed her a distorted version of herself, and distinguish a single truth in an ocean of lies without drowning in them. How do you find something real in a world built on deception? The key was not to search the city, but to understand its flaw. The mirrors showed only surfaces, reflections of what was already there. They could not create something new. The fragment, a piece of solidified, transformative knowledge, would have no reflection at all. She began her search, forcing herself to look not at the dazzling images, but at the gaps between them. It was a disorienting, terrifying process. One mirror showed her as the celebrated professor she had left behind, another as a power, mad sorceress ruling over a broken world. She saw herself old and forgotten, and then young and naive. Each reflection was a potential future, a fear, or a desire, all designed to hook into her insecurities and pull her into a static existence of endless self-analysis. The citizens, noticing her strange behavior of looking past the glass, began to cluster around her, their whispers turning from confusion to hostility. She was a flaw in their perfect world of surfaces, a reminder of a depth they had willingly abandoned. Their mirrored reality was a comfortable lie, and she was the unsettling truth. The pressure built, a psychic weight threatening to crush her resolve. Then she saw it. In the city's central plaza stood a colossal, flawless mirror, the source of the entire city's pervasive illusion. And in its perfect, silvered surface, there was a single, small void, a dark, non-reflective spot where the third fragment, a shard of pure obsidian, was embedded like a flaw in a diamond. That was the reality she sought. To claim it, she had to touch it. But as she approached, the mirror showed her not a distortion, but a perfect, heartbreaking image. It showed her and Kale, standing together as partners, triumphant and whole. It was the one reflection she desperately wanted to be true. The illusion was a final, masterful trap, offering her heart's desire in exchange for surrendering to the fantasy. For a long moment, she hesitated, her hand outstretched. Then she remembered the weight of the heart of the mountain in her pack, the feel of the brand on her palm. That was her reality. With a cry that was equal parts grief and defiance, she did not reach for the image. Instead, she drove her fist directly into the dark, non-reflective spot. The mirror did not crack. It exploded. A shockwave of pure silence radiated outwards, and the sound of a million shards of glass hitting the ground was like a sudden, violent rain. As the silvered dust settled, the citizens blinked, looking at their own hands and then at each other's true faces with dawning confusion and wonder. They were free. The obsidian fragment fell into Elara's waiting hand, cold and solid, but her act of liberation had a cost. On the edge of the now shattered plaza, 3 figures stood watching. The keepers of the veil. They did not move to stop her. They simply observed, their hooded faces conveying a final, grim judgment. She had not just retrieved an artifact. She had dismantled an entire reality, no matter how false it was. In their eyes, she was no longer a reckless scholar or a nuisance. She was a cascade of chaos, a direct and significant threat to the world's fragile stability. Their passive observation was over. The hunt would now begin in earnest. The mirrored dust of the shattered city still glittered on her clothes as Elara fled into the barren plains beyond. Her solitude was absolute, a hollowed-out space where Kale's absence echoed louder than any footstep. It was in this emptiness that the keepers finally made their definitive move. She did not see them approach. One moment she was alone, and the next, a woman stood before her on the path, as if she had grown from the twilight itself. She was older, her face a landscape of calm authority, and she wore the simple gray robes of the keepers, but with a silver clasp that denoted leadership. Her name was Lyra, and her presence carried a weight that stilled the air. Elara did not run. She knew this confrontation was inevitable. Lyra's voice was not threatening, but profoundly tired, like a physician delivering a terminal diagnosis. She did not demand the fragments. She offered a choice. "Join us," she said. "Your intellect, your resilience, they are precisely what our order was founded to protect. You have seen the cost of this power, the way it twists perception and breaks bonds. You have felt it drain your own spirit. Imagine that power amplified 1,000-fold in the hands of someone like Vance, or worse, someone with no moral compass at all. Reality is not a sturdy table to be reforged. It is a delicate tapestry, and a single pull on the wrong thread could unravel everything. We are not jailers, Elara. We are custodians. We prevent the fire from ever being lit. The argument was devastating in its logic. It was not born of greed, but of a solemn, terrifying responsibility. Lyra presented a vision of a world safe from its own potential for self-destruction, a world where cataclysmic power remained a beautiful, dormant theory. She offered Elara a purpose within that system, a life of meaning spent guarding the ultimate secret, surrounded by others who shared the burden. It was the most reasonable, the most morally sound path she had been offered since this began. To continue was to risk becoming the very catastrophe the keepers were sworn to prevent. Elara looked down at the brand on her palm, still pulsing with the quiet rhythm of her quest. She thought of Arian, not as a myth, but as a man who had faced this same choice centuries ago. He had not destroyed his work. He had hidden it, creating a challenge that required not just intelligence, but wisdom to complete. He had believed that someone, someday, would be worthy of this knowledge, that humanity could evolve to handle such a truth. To surrender now would be to declare that he was wrong, that no one could ever be trusted, that fear was the only rational response to power. Her voice was quiet but unshakable when she finally replied, "You are protecting a cage and calling it a garden. Arian did not create this power to be buried forever. He created it to be understood. I will not help you smother a flame that could one day light the way." Lyra's calm demeanor did not fracture like Vance's had. Instead, it solidified into something far more formidable, a final, sorrowful resolve. The offer of sanctuary vanished from her eyes, replaced by the cold certainty of a surgeon preparing to amputate a limb to save the body. "Then you leave us no choice," she said. "The risk you represent is too great. From this moment, you are an enemy of the balance we preserve. We will use every resource, every piece of knowledge at our disposal, to ensure you do not complete the formula. Do not mistake our restraint for weakness." It was a dismissal and a declaration of war. Lyra turned and walked away, melting back into the landscape as silently as she had arrived. Elara was alone again, but the nature of her solitude had changed. She was no longer just a seeker or a renegade scholar. She was a target, and the most disciplined, knowledgeable, and morally convinced hunters in the world were now fully committed to her destruction. The final stage of the journey would be a race not just against time, but against an order that believed her death was the only way to save reality itself. The bridge materialized from mist and memory, a narrow span of solidified light, arching over an abyss of swirling colors and half-formed shapes. It was the bridge of decisions, and the moment Elara set foot upon it, the world began to breathe in response. With every cautious step, the chaotic potential of the chasm below rippled outwards. To her left, a phantom city of silver towers flickered into existence for a heartbeat before dissolving into a forest of crystalline trees. To her right, a vast, calm ocean appeared, only to be swallowed by a desert of black sand. These were not mere illusions. They were possibilities, entire realities budding and dying with the shifting focus of her will. The bridge itself shuddered, its luminous structure growing more translucent, threatening to return to the nothingness from which it came. She understood the test instantly. The formula was not dormant. Its power was already leaking from the fragments in her possession, and her own mind was the catalyst. To cross, she had to achieve a state of absolute focus, to become an anchor in the storm of maybe. She narrowed her world to the feel of the cool, smooth path beneath her feet, to the rhythm of her own breath. The bridge solidified, the chaotic spectacle at its edges calming to a gentle, shimmering haze. For a few precious moments, she was in control. Then the doubts, her oldest and most persistent foes, rose from the chasm. What if Kale was right? What if this power was a poison that would ultimately consume her? The image of his sorrowful face as he turned away flashed in her mind. The bridge groaned, a long, deep sound of protesting energy. A crack like forked lightning splintered the path ahead, and through it, she saw not the swirling colors of possibility, but the simple, solid rock of the far cliff. The temptation to let go, to fall back into a world that made simple, physical sense, was overwhelming. It would be so easy to stop fighting, to let the keepers win and bear the burden no longer. But then she thought of Vance and of Lyra. They represented two different kinds of prison, one of ego and one of fear. To surrender was to validate their belief that this power was too great for any one soul to hold. She tightened her grip on the strap of her pack, feeling the solid weight of the heart of the mountain. Her will was not a weapon, it was a foundation. She rebuilt the bridge in her mind, stone by mental stone, pouring her resolve into its structure. The crack sealed itself, the light beneath her feet burning steady and bright once more. She walked forward, and this time, the realities that bloomed at the edges of the bridge were quieter, more stable reflections of the world she knew. She had not commanded the chaos, she had found a harmony with it. Stepping onto the solid ground of the far side, she looked back. The bridge was gone, the chasm once again, a silent, impenetrable gulf. Her heart hammered in her chest, not from fear, but from a terrifying realization. Her success was not just a personal victory, it was a calibration. The formula responded to her, and her alone, in this way. Her control had stabilized the bridge, but her momentary doubt had nearly destroyed it. What would happen if her focus broke completely while holding the completed formula? The power she sought was not a static force to be mastered. It was a living mirror, and her own soul was the image it would project onto the world. The path beyond the chasm led into a living kaleidoscope. The Garden of Mutability was a place where the very concept of a fixed form was a forgotten dream. Flowers bloomed into flocks of jewel-toned birds that dissolved into mist before they could take flight. Trees twisted their bark into the shapes of running animals, only to freeze back into wood a moment later. The air hummed with the sound of perpetual transformation, a chaotic symphony of becoming and unbecoming. At the garden's heart, resting on a pedestal of woven roots, was the fourth fragment, a shard that pulsed with a soft, opalescent light. Guarding it was a creature that had no shape of its own. It was a pool of liquid silver, and as Elara approached, it rose from the ground, its surface rippling to form a perfect, shimmering replica of her own face, contorted in a mask of pure terror. This was not an illusion of regret, like in the Oasis. This was a reflection of her deepest, most fundamental fear, given solid form, the fear of catastrophic failure. The silver creature mirrored her every flinch, every nervous glance, amplifying her own dread and reflecting it back at her with paralyzing intensity. To reach the fragment, she would have to walk directly through this manifestation of her own panic. Her first instinct was to fight it, to assert her will and force the creature to submit. But in a garden where nothing remained the same, resistance was futile. The more she struggled against the terrified mirror image, the more solid and threatening it became, its form shifting to show her visions of the formula backfiring, of reality tearing itself apart because of a single misstep on her part. The creature fed on her rigidity, growing larger and more menacing with every beat of her fearful heart. She was trapped, a prisoner of her own projected horror. Then she remembered the bridge, the way her focus had calmed the chaos. She looked past her own frightened reflection and truly saw the garden around her. It was not a place of destruction, but of endless, fluid possibility. A stone did not mourn being a flower, and the flower did not fear becoming a bird. They simply were, in a constant state of graceful adaptation. Her fear was not the problem, her resistance to it was. Taking a shuddering breath, she stopped fighting. She let the fear exist, a cold knot in her stomach, but she refused to let it dictate her actions. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, and as she did, she consciously relaxed her body, opening herself to the garden's inherent nature. She embraced the concept of change, not as a threat, but as the fundamental law of this place, and she realized of life itself. A profound shift occurred. The silver creature, which had been poised to strike, hesitated. Its surface softened, the sharp edges of her terrified face melting away. It was still a mirror, but now it reflected her calm acceptance, her newfound willingness to flow with the unpredictable. It rippled gently, and then it parted, flowing around her like water and sinking back into the earth, its purpose fulfilled. She had not conquered her fear. She had integrated it. She reached the pedestal and claimed the fourth fragment. The moment her fingers closed around the warm, opalescent shard, a wave of serene stability radiated out from her. The garden did not stop changing, but the transformations became slower, more deliberate, and beautifully coherent. A sapling grew into a tree that bore both fruit and faintly chiming bells. A creature of moss and light curled contentedly at its roots. Her internal shift had not just calmed the guardian, it had introduced a new harmonic into the garden's chaotic song. She had imposed a subtle order through understanding, not force. The tangible proof was all around her. Her actions had a direct, visible impact on the very fabric of this pocket reality. If a simple change in her perspective could bring harmony to a place of pure mutability, what could a completed formula, wielded with that same enlightened intent, accomplish in her own world? The responsibility was as vast as the power, and for the first time, she felt not just its weight, but its profound, beautiful potential. The harmony she had brought to the garden felt like a fragile shield against the world. Yet, the solitude within that peace was a deep and aching thing. A soft crunch of footsteps on jeweled moss broke the stillness. Kale stood at the edge of the clearing, his posture no longer rigid with defiance, but softened with a weary resolve. "I was wrong," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "My fear for you was a cage of my own making. I saw the cost, but I was blind to the strength it was forging in you. You are not being consumed. You are being refined." His apology was not just words. It was a surrender of his own deepest fear, an acknowledgement that her path, however terrifying, was true. Their reconciliation was a quiet thing, a clasp of hands and a meeting of eyes that spoke more than any lengthy debate. The fractured trust knitted itself back together, not as it was, but stronger, tempered by the fire of their disagreement. In that moment, Elara felt the immense weight on her spirit lighten, not because the burden was gone, but because it was now shared by a willing heart. Their renewed partnership was immediately tested. As they prepared to leave the garden, Kale noticed a subtle pattern emerging in the bark of the tree that had borne both fruit and bells. It was not a natural growth, but a map, its lines flowing like veins of silver. It was a final message from the garden, a reward for achieving balance. The map depicted a cross-section of the world, pointing not to a mountain or a forest, but to a cavern system deep beneath the Earth's crust, a place labeled in flowing script as the heart of the world. According to the legends Kale recalled from his family's stories, it was not a physical heart, but a nexus of the planet's latent creative energy, a place where the line between thought and matter was said to be thinnest. The final component, the breath of a star, was waiting there. The legends also spoke of the cost of entry. The caverns were a living labyrinth, a psychic amplifier that would reflect their innermost thoughts and fears back at them with physical force. A moment of doubt could trigger a rock slide. A spark of anger might summon a geyser of superheated steam. Their greatest strength, their reunited partnership, would also be their greatest vulnerability, as the labyrinth would use their care for each other as a weapon. The path ahead was the most dangerous yet, a journey into the world's subconscious, and they would have to walk it with hearts and minds perfectly aligned. The descent into the world's core was a passage through layers of time and pressure, where the rock itself seemed to breathe. The air grew thick and heavy, humming with a deep, resonant frequency that vibrated in their bones. This was the heart of the world, a cavern of colossal, crystalline structures that pulsed with a soft, internal light. Here, the solid ground was an illusion. The floor shifted in response to their thoughts, and the very air shimmered, threatening to crystallize their fears into deadly obstacles. A shared moment of doubt from Kale caused the path ahead to fracture, a chasm opening at their feet. A spike of panic from Elara made the crystals around them glow with a hostile, sharp light. The labyrinth was a perfect mirror of their collective mind, and their survival depended on achieving a harmony they had never before attempted. They moved as one organism, their communication reduced to a language of glances and shared breath. When Elara felt a wave of anxiety about the formula's final cost, Kale would place a steadying hand on her shoulder, his own calm focus flowing into her, and the trembling floor would still. When Kale's old fears about her transformation resurfaced, she would meet his gaze, her own resolve a silent anchor, and the hostile glow of the crystals would soften back to a gentle pulse. They were not fighting the environment, they were learning its rhythm and becoming a part of its song. Deep within the central chamber, suspended in a vortex of swirling elemental energy, was the final fragment. It was the breath of a star, a shimmering sphere of captured light that seemed to contain a miniature galaxy. To retrieve it, they had to extend their wills in perfect unison, creating a cradle of shared intent to gently draw it from the storm. There was no room for a single stray thought, no space for individual hesitation. Elara focused on the potential for creation, Kale on the strength of their partnership. Their minds merged in purpose, and as their combined focus touched the sphere, the chaotic vortex calmed, the energies aligning into a beautiful, ordered spiral. The sphere drifted into Elara's waiting hands, warm and impossibly light. In that moment of perfect synergy, a profound understanding passed between them. The alchemist's power was never meant to be mastered by a lone individual. Its true nature was relational, a force that demanded not just intellect, but the binding trust and complementary strengths of a united purpose. Their success had secured the final key, but it had also given them the final, missing piece of the puzzle itself. The formula was not a set of commands, it was a dialogue, and they had just learned its first true word. The final fragment clicked into place with a sound like a distant star being born. In the hushed silence of the ancient observatory, the completed formula lay before Elara, its arcane symbols now a coherent river of meaning flowing across the slate. She had expected a list of ingredients or a complex series of instructions. What she found was a single, elegant equation describing the fundamental relationship between consciousness and matter. It was not a recipe for change, but the grammar of creation itself. To speak this language was to converse with reality, to suggest a new truth, and have the universe agree. The air in the dome chamber began to crackle, thick with an energy that made the dust motes dance in the shafts of moonlight. Her own breath felt like a catalyst, each exhalation charged with the power to reshape the world. This was the moment Arian had prepared her for, not to follow steps, but to make a choice with the weight of all existence resting upon it. A single, focused thought, imbued with clear intent while holding the formula, would be enough to set the process in motion. She could erase a plague, mend a fractured continent, or paint the sky with new constellations. The awe was a soaring, luminous feeling, a glimpse of godhood. But the dread was an anchor, pulling her back to earth, for every act of creation demanded a corresponding act of unmaking. To heal a forest, would she draw life from another? To ensure peace, would she rewrite the free will of millions? The formula was a mirror, and the first reality it would transform was her own soul, revealing what she was truly willing to sacrifice for a better world. Her legacy would not be the power she wielded, but the choice she made in this perfect, silent moment, balanced between infinite potential and infinite consequence. The observatory's dome groaned under a sudden, unnatural impact. The attack was not a stealthy infiltration, but a full-scale siege. Through the fractured crystal panes, Elara saw them, a doctor. Vance's hired mercenaries advancing with brutal efficiency, flanked by the silent, coordinated figures of the Keepers of the Veil. Their alliance was a terrifying fusion of academic cunning and monastic discipline, a pincer move designed to overwhelm them completely. There was no time for the profound choice the formula demanded, only for survival. Kale was already moving, his voice cutting through the rising chaos. He pointed to the unstable energy fields still radiating from the central slate. "We do not fight them," he shouted. "We turn their own force against them." Use the environment. The observatory itself became their weapon. Elara's mind, still humming with the formula's grammar, saw the room not as a structure, but as a network of potential. She focused her will, not to transform, but to redirect. As the first mercenaries breached the main door, she touched a specific symbol on the slate. The floor in the entryway rippled, its stone momentarily becoming as slick as oil, sending the attackers sprawling into each other. Kale, using his knowledge of structural weaknesses, shoved a heavy apparatus onto a precariously balanced pillar, causing a controlled collapse that blocked a secondary entrance. The keepers were a different challenge. They moved through the chaos with an eerie calm, their minds shielded against simple tricks. One raised a hand, and the air before her solidified into a shimmering, transparent wall, halting their retreat. Elara reacted instinctively, recalling the lesson of the Garden of Mutability. She did not try to break the wall. Instead, she introduced a new variable, focusing on the principle of decay embedded in the very air. The wall's perfect structure began to cloud and crumble at the edges, its energy dissipating back into the atmosphere. It was a fierce, exhausting battle of wits and will. Each alchemical trap they sprung drained Elara further, while every tactical maneuver pushed Kale to his physical limit. A misjudgment by Vance's men, who attempted to seize the slate directly, resulted in a feedback pulse of raw potential that threw them back, their weapons warping into useless, abstract shapes. The sight of it finally broke Vance's resolve. He stared in horror at the twisted metal, his ambition crumbling into sheer terror. He signaled a retreat, his mercenaries pulling back in disarray. But Lyra and her keepers stood their ground for a moment longer, their expressions not of defeat, but of grim confirmation. With a final, disappointed look at Elara, Lyra gestured, and the remaining keepers melted back into the shadows from which they came. The immediate battle was won, but their victory was Pyrrhic. A deep, grinding shudder ran through the observatory. A web of cracks spread across the central dome, and dust and fragments of crystal began to rain down. The structural damage from the fight and the backlash of unleashed energies had triggered a catastrophic failure. The sanctuary was dying. Kale grabbed Elara's arm, pulling her toward the only intact exit. "We have minutes, maybe less," he yelled over the roar of falling stone. The time for contemplation was over. The collapsing observatory was a giant hourglass, and the sand was pouring out. Her final choice about the formula would not be made in a place of quiet power, but in a desperate race against oblivion. The roar of the collapsing dome was a brutal reminder of the world's fragile substance. For one stolen moment, as Kale secured their escape route, Elara stood alone before the radiant slate, the formula's truth burning in her mind. She saw the paths it could carve, not as vague possibilities, but as stark, branching realities. In one, she envisioned cities of light rising from barren soil, hunger and sickness, banished by a single, benevolent thought. It was a world mended, a utopia woven from pure intent. But the vision twisted. She saw the same power enforcing a terrible, silent peace. Every divergent thought smoothed away, every unpredictable human spark extinguished for the sake of a perfect, sterile order. It was a dystopia not of fire and ruin, but of absolute control, a gilded cage for all of humanity. The power to create was in the same breath, the power to annihilate what made creation meaningful. A passage from Arian's journal surfaced in her memory, a warning she had once read as poetic philosophy. He wrote that the secret was a scalpel, not a sword, and that it must only ever be held by a hand that valued the balance of the scales over the grip of the throne. The true danger was not in wielding the power, but but in the desire to wield it without question. Her entire journey flashed before her the arrogance of her initial pursuit, the shattering of her academic life, the painful lessons of the Oasis and the Mirror City, the fracture and healing of her bond with Kale. Each step had been a lesson in humility, sanding down her certainty and replacing it with a profound respect for the delicate, interconnected web she now held in her hands. She had not been tested on her intelligence, but on her worthiness to carry a responsibility that had no end. This internal resolution settled deep within her, a calm, unshakable core. She would not be a queen or a tyrant of reality. She would be its steward. The choice was no longer about whether to use the formula, but how to use it in a way that honored the beautiful, chaotic, and unpredictable world it was meant to serve. The climactic act awaited, but she was finally ready to meet it. The final pieces of the dome began their deadly descent as Vance lunged across the room, his eyes wild with a terrible hunger. His fingers were inches from the glowing slate, from the power he had coveted for so long. In that splinter of a second, Elara did not think of reshaping the world. She thought of protecting it. She placed her hands upon the formula, and instead of a command, she offered a request. She did not ask the universe to bend. She asked it to remember itself. The energy that erupted from the slate was not a destructive blast, but a wave of pure, resonant harmony. It washed over the crumbling observatory, and the falling stone froze in mid-air, not from a halt, but as if time itself had taken a breath to listen. The fractured crystal of the dome knitted itself back together, the cracks sealing as if they were wounds being healed by light. The very air, thick with dust and panic, grew still and clean. The knowledge, the immense and dangerous grammar of creation, flowed out of the slate, out of the journals, and out of her own mind. She felt it leave her, a river of stars draining from her consciousness, taking with it the weight and the wonder, the temptation and the terror. She forgot the symbols, the components, the very feel of that ultimate power. All that remained was the memory of the choice and the profound peace that followed. Vance screamed, a raw sound of utter loss, as the slate went dark and inert, now just a piece of carved stone. He clawed at his own head, realizing that the secret he had sacrificed everything for was gone, erased not just from the world, but from the one person who had ever truly understood it. His ambition had nothing left to grasp. He was defeated not by force, but by a wisdom he could never comprehend. Elara stood empty, and yet she had never felt more complete. Her mastery was not proven in the moment she activated the formula, but in the moment she let it go. She had wielded the power to become a god, and chose instead to remain human, to preserve the beautiful, fragile, and unpredictable dance of reality for everyone else. True strength, she now knew, was not about holding on to the reins of creation. It was about having the courage to drop them. Silence settled in the observatory, a deep and resonant quiet that felt earned. The air was no longer charged with potential, but simply clean, smelling of night and cool stone. Elara looked at her hands, no longer feeling the hum of the formula, only the faint, familiar pulse of the brand on her palm. It was a scar now, a reminder of a journey completed, not a key to be used. Across the room, Kale stood by the restored crystal dome, gazing out at the star-dusted sky, his silhouette a picture of quiet relief. The immense power was gone, its dangerous secret returned to the void from which it came. Vance was a broken man, already being led away by the authorities his own chaos had summoned, his grand ambitions reduced to ashes. The world was safe, not because a new ruler had taken the throne, but because the throne itself had been willingly dismantled. Elara felt the absence of the formula, not as a loss, but as a liberation. The weight that had pressed upon her soul since she first opened that journal was finally lifted. She had not just saved the world from others, she had saved herself from the corrupting allure of absolute power. Her goal had never been to become a god, but to ensure that no one ever could. This was the true resolution Arian had intended all along, a test not of intellect, but of character. In choosing to let go, she had passed. The profound peace that filled her was a quieter, more enduring kind of power, one that asked for nothing and promised only the simple, profound satisfaction of a job well done. She was forever changed, her innocence traded for a hard-won wisdom, but she was content. The quest was over, and the story could finally end. The profound silence of the restored observatory was a balm to their weary spirits. Standing together under the newly whole dome, Elara and Kale did not need to speak of their next steps, for the path had already been forged in the crucible of their shared sacrifice. They had looked into the heart of ultimate power and chosen to walk away, and in that choice, they found a purpose far more enduring than any single secret. They would travel the world together, a sentinel and a scholar, using their unique skills to seek out other fragments of forgotten knowledge. Elara's intellect and newfound wisdom would identify which truths were too dangerous to be left unguarded, while Kale's survival instincts and deep connection to the land would ensure they stayed one step ahead of those who would misuse them. Their partnership was no longer a temporary alliance, but the foundation of a lifelong mission. As they walked out of the observatory for the last time, the first light of dawn was painting the horizon in soft hues of gold and rose. The weight of the alchemist's last secret was gone, but in its place was a profound appreciation for the world's endless, beautiful mysteries. They were not chasing a legend anymore. They were protecting the delicate balance of history itself, ensuring that some doors, once opened, are gently closed again, not with fear, but with reverence. The greatest treasure was not the power they had found, but the trust they had built in letting it go. Rain had washed the city clean, and the university gates felt smaller than she remembered. Elara walked the familiar stone paths, not as a fugitive or a failure, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen the foundations of the world. The whispers began the moment she was spotted, a ripple of speculation following her through the quadrangles. She did not seek out her old colleagues or visit her former office. Her destination was the one place that had never judged her, the deep archives where this entire journey had begun. She requested an audience with the head archivist, an elderly man who had once looked at her with pity. This time, he saw only a profound and unshakable calm in her eyes. She presented him with Arian's journal, its leather cover worn but intact. The most volatile pages, those containing the direct path to the formula's components, had been carefully removed. What remained was a testament to the alchemist's genius and his warnings, a historical document that could inspire without endangering. It was a symbolic act, a way to honor the pursuit of knowledge while ensuring its most dangerous fruits remained out of reach. This was not a surrender, but a strategic preservation. She had closed the circle, returning the spark to the tinderbox, but removing the flint. Her departure was as quiet as her arrival. She did not look back at the spires that had once defined her life, but as she passed through the gates for the final time, a group of first-year students, their arms laden with new books, stopped to watch her go. One of them, a young woman with a fiercely curious glint in her eye, would later swear she saw a faint, pulsing light emanating from the visitor's palm. The story of the renegade scholar who had bested the great doctor, Vance and then vanished, began to ferment in the student taverns and lecture halls, slowly crystallizing into a new kind of myth. Elara had not reclaimed her old life. She had transcended it, becoming a guardian in the shadows and a silent inspiration for those who dared to look beyond the accepted texts. Her legacy would not be in a published paper, but in the quiet wonder of the next generation, who would never know her name, but would feel the echo of her choice in the safer world they inherited. The rain had not yet dried on the cobblestones when Lyra found her. The leader of the keepers stood alone in the small courtyard where Elara had sought a moment of quiet, her gray robes blending with the lingering mist. There were no guards flanking her, no air of judgment or threat. Lyra's expression held a quiet gravity, the weariness of a long vigil finally lifted. "I did not come to resume our debate," she began, her voice softer than Elara had ever heard it. "I came to bear witness to a choice I feared no one was capable of making." "You proved me wrong." Her gaze was direct, acknowledging not a defeated adversary, but a peer who had navigated the same impossible dilemma and emerged with an answer they had both failed to foresee. The Keeper's purpose was preservation through containment, a philosophy built on the certainty that such power would always corrupt. "Your journey has shown us another way," Lyra continued. "A path of stewardship, not through suppression, but through the ultimate act of release. This is a wisdom our order had forgotten." In that moment, the chasm of ideology that had separated them narrowed into a bridge of hard-won respect. Lyra did not ask for forgiveness or offer a full alliance. Instead, she presented a simple, profound offer, a truce, and perhaps in time, a channel for communication. "Should you or your companion ever uncover another shadow that threatens the balance, you will not stand alone. We have watched from the shadows for too long. It is possible that a new kind of guardianship is needed, one that operates in the light of understanding rather than the darkness of fear." This gesture was more validating than any academic prize or public acclaim. It was an acknowledgement from the most disciplined sentinels of secret knowledge that Elara's path had not been one of reckless destruction, but of a deeper, more profound protection. Their conflict had not ended in victory or defeat, but in a mutual recognition of shared purpose, achieved through different means. As Lyra turned to leave, her final words hung in the damp air, a promise that changed the shape of the future. The work of guarding the world's fragile truths would continue, but now it would have more than one set of hands. The world felt softer in the weeks that followed, as if a fever had broken. Elara first noticed it in the neglected park near their temporary home, a patch of bare, compacted earth, long deemed sterile by the city, was now dotted with the green shoots of wildflowers that had not been seen there in decades. It was not a dramatic, overnight forest, but a quiet, stubborn resurgence of life where none should be. Then came the stories, whispered over market stalls and in quiet cafes. A long-standing feud between two neighboring families was inexplicably resolved, not with a dramatic truce, but with a simple, mutual understanding that seemed to have bloomed overnight. An old, polluted river began to run clearer, its water purifying at a rate that baffled environmental scientists. These were not the world-altering changes the formula could have commanded. They were subtle, gentle corrections, like a master weaver repairing a few frayed threads in a vast and complex tapestry. The formula's activation had been a single, harmonious chord struck against the fabric of reality, and these small miracles were its lingering resonance, a quiet echo of the balance she had asked the universe to remember. It was a testament that true transformation did not always need to shout. Sometimes, the most profound changes arrived in a whisper, mending the world one small, perfect stitch at a time. This enduring essence was a constant, gentle reminder that her journey had not been in vain. Her choice to release the power had not erased its influence, but had instead allowed it to diffuse into the world's foundations, weaving new possibilities of healing and connection into the very nature of things. The grand secret was gone, but its lesson in harmony remained, a quiet promise that the potential for renewal was now woven a little more deeply into the pattern of existence itself. The blank journal felt different in her hands than Arian's ancient text ever had. Its pages were not a puzzle to be solved, but a promise to be kept. Under the soft glow of an oil lamp, in a quietened room, Elara opened it for the first time, dipping her pen into ink the color of the night sky. She did not draw the path to the heart of the world, or the forge of concepts. Instead, she began sketching the location of a hidden spring Kale had shown her, its water possessing a curious, calming property. She noted the migratory path of a rare bird, whose feathers, according to local lore, could only be found where the Earth's energy was most stable. This was not a map to power, but a ledger of balance. Each entry was a small, deliberate act of preservation, a way to understand the world's quiet wonders without exploiting them. As her pen moved, she felt the final remnants of her old identity. The desperate seeker, the academic hunter, dissolve completely. She was no longer pulling threads from the tapestry to see how they worked. She was learning the pattern so she could better mend it. This new purpose was a quiet, humming certainty in her chest, more profound than the thrill of any discovery. It was the peace of becoming a guardian, a silent sentinel for the delicate equilibrium she had nearly shattered. What small, unnoticed wonders in your own world might be worth protecting, simply for the beauty of their existence? Sleep came to her not as a rest, but as a doorway. That night, Elara found herself standing in a place woven from starlight and memory, a silent library where the shelves stretched into infinity and the books glowed with their own soft, internal luminescence. A figure waited for her there, no longer a myth from a crumbling journal, but a man. Arian's form was calm and substantial, his eyes holding the deep, patient light of countless observed centuries. He did not smile, but his expression was one of profound approval. "You chose the lock," he said, his voice a quiet resonance in the dream space, "not the key. In that, you have surpassed every seeker who came before you." His true last secret, he explained, was not the formula that could rewrite reality. That was merely the test, the most dangerous and alluring trap he could devise. The real secret was the understanding you found at the end of it all, knowledge that serves only itself, becomes a poison. It must serve the balance, the intricate and beautiful dance between chaos and order, growth and decay. You did not seek to control the dance. You learned to appreciate its music. The revelation settled into her dream self with the force of an absolute truth, completing a circle that began in a dusty archive. Her entire journey, every sacrifice and moment of terror, had not been about obtaining power at all. It had been a crucible designed to burn away the desire for it, to forge not a master of the universe, but a guardian of its essence. She had gained the one thing that could never be taken or misused, the wisdom to know what not to do. The spectral Arian began to fade, his form dissolving back into the starlight from which it was woven. His final words were not a command, but a blessing. The legacy was never in the keeping of the secret. It is in the living of the understanding. When Elara awoke with the dawn, the dream felt more real than the solid ground beneath her feet. A quiet, unshakable peace had replaced the last vestiges of doubt. She had not just closed a chapter in her forgotten alchemist's life. She had fulfilled its true purpose, becoming the living answer to a question asked centuries ago. The greatest transformations are never of the world, but of the self, and in that silent, personal alchemy, a deeper magic forever resides. The wind tasted of salt and distant rain as it swept across the cliff edge, pulling at their clothes like an eager child. Below them, uncharted lands unfurled in a tapestry of mist-shrouded valleys and jagged peaks that defied any map. This was the true beginning. Kale adjusted the pack on his shoulders, his movements easy and familiar, a silent testament to the partnership that had been reforged in trust. Elara did not feel the old, frantic pull of a singular secret waiting to be unearthed. Instead, a calm anticipation hummed within her, a quiet resonance with the vast, unknown world before them. Her smile was not one of triumph, but of readiness. The alchemist's final lesson was no longer a memory. It was the lens through which she now saw everything. Every hidden glen and forgotten ruin was not a prize to be claimed, but a thread in a larger, living pattern to be understood and protected. Their mission was no longer a race toward a finish line. It was a rhythm, a lifelong practice of walking the delicate line between curiosity and reverence. The horizon was not a destination, but an invitation to listen, to learn the subtle music of a world forever in the act of becoming. What new melodies would they discover in the silence beyond the next mountain? Her journey had not led her to a throne of power, but to a quiet understanding that hummed in harmony with the world itself. Elara had begun as a historian, chasing a ghost in a text, and she had been transformed into a guardian who now listened to the living story of the earth. The most profound alchemy was not the transformation of lead into gold, but the turning of ambition into reverence, of a solitary seeker into a connected part of a greater whole. She had learned that the greatest secrets are not those that grant dominion over reality, but those that reveal our responsibility within it, empowering a deep and lasting humility. The world remained a trove of hidden knowledge, its mysteries layered within every forgotten ruin and silent forest. But now, those secrets were watched over by a keeper who had felt their terrifying weight and chosen to set them down. This provides a final, emotional closure to her epic quest, a sense that the cycle begun in a dusty archive has reached its natural and rightful end. Yet, it also leaves a door perpetually open, not for another hunt for a singular formula, but for the endless, gentle exploration of balance, wonder, and the quiet magic that sustains our existence. The story of the alchemist is complete, but the story of the guardian has only just begun. What small, quiet mysteries are waiting to be honored in your own corner of the world?
you.